Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today I'm going to go over the nominations for the World Fantasy Awards 2020 in the novel category. Now, this award show, like basically every other awards this year, has been canceled and moved to an online format, and it basically awards like the top fantasy book of 2019, even though it's happening very late in 2020. I read the 5 nominations for novels. I didn't read novellas or short stories or like short story collections. Nothing like that. I just read the novels. Now, there are 5 nominations. 3 of them are books that I have not read prior to looking at the nominations for the World Fantasy Awards, and 2 of them I had read earlier this year because they were nominated for other awards. Now, if you've watched my reviews of award shows before, then you'll know that usually there's maybe one book I don't like, a couple books that are pretty mediocre, and then 2 or 3 books that I'm like, I can really see this winning. I'm really interested in these books. I'd be totally okay with this winning. This time, weirdly enough, there were 3 books that I hated, 1 book that I thought was pretty okay, and 1 that I absolutely loved. So, that didn't work out too well, and it's going to be very easy to choose who I think should win this award. Whether the panel of judges actually agrees with me is a completely different subject, but this video is about what I think of these books. Now, I am going to cover the 3 books that I haven't read first, and then cover the 2 that I did read at the end. And so if you've seen the other videos, you can skip over the end part. And then at the very end, I'm going to tell you who I think should win, which is going to be pretty easy to guess once you hear the nominations and what I think about them. I am going to tell you what I liked about each of the books, and then what I didn't like about each of the books, and then we can kind of go from there. You guys can let me know what you thought about these nominations, or if you completely disagree with what I'm saying. The first nomination we're going to cover is Queen of the Conquered by Kacen Callender. And this book was so exciting for me to read because it is basically like a conversation about slavery and how horribly humanity in general treats Black lives. But the fantasy world it takes place in basically mimics what you would assume is the Caribbean during the peak of the slave trade. These takes place on islands where Black people are enslaved and white people are the ruling class who, treat slaves like shit. And the conversation around slavery in this book I thought was so well done, so interesting, and that I loved. The actual story itself is where I had problems in this book. Now, the main character, the Queen of the Conquered, is a woman of color who, through some basic fluke of her generational history, is part of the ruling class, even though she's not a white woman. She is completely alone. Her mother and the rest of her family have been assassinated, and she went into hiding until she became an adult and came into her own magical powers, which is the ability to read other people's minds. And in this book, she is basically trying to become the ruler of the kingdom as the old king dies. Because that's how a new ruler is elected. It's not necessarily it passes on to your child, it's another one of the ruling families is given the rulership. Now, it's quickly established that these people hate people of color. Like, the ruling class hate people of color. Like, they have no problem treating them as, like, subhuman, murdering, raping, killing, whatever. And they don't really seem to have much problem murdering each other. They will kill each other with, like, the slightest excuse and basically get away with it without any real investigation. As long as you don't, like, murder somebody, like, and can be easily caught, no one's going to investigate and figure out, like, who murdered that person, even if you're wealthy or not. The magic system seems to be how they protect themselves, but her only power is really to be able to read minds. So she is hated by the other people in the ruling class because she is a woman of color, and she is hated by the slaves around her, the other people of color around her, because she treats them like slaves. Like, she could have easily freed all of her slaves the moment she came into power, but she still keeps them as slaves. She still upholds all the laws of slavery and kills her slaves when they misbehave or do things that are illegal for slaves to do. So everybody hates this woman. And I just couldn't buy any situation where she is still alive. Like, the white people have no problem killing the other white people, and they hate her more than they hate any other white people. She has zero protection. The slaves are not going to protect her. And the like, the big reveal at the end doesn't make any sense either, because the stupid bitch can read minds. How did she not see this shit coming? Like, her superpower is to read minds. How are people hiding things from her? But yeah, it was just, like, the plot and her being alive, just, I couldn't buy with all of the things that you see happening in the background of this universe. It was entirely not believable that this woman is alive. And so, while I wanted this to be a great book, I just didn't like it because I couldn't get behind the story. I could not suspend my disbelief and get behind this story. So I will not be continuing on with the series or anything like that. But I would like to try some of Kacen Calendar's contemporary, because I've heard that they do really, really good, or I've heard really, really, really good things about their contemporary writings. So eventually I will get around to trying Kacen Calendar's contemporary, but not a fantasy writer for me. The next book that I read was The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. This one was really, really interesting as far as, like, the magic system, I guess. It wasn't really the magic that was interesting, it was gods and goddesses in this universe, where gods and goddesses existed, but it was more like a god system where humanity had to explain why certain things happen, and so a god is responsible for that. It wasn't very, like, Grecian or anything like that, but gods could be meteorites, mosquitoes, a raven, a rock. Like, gods existed, but they weren't human gods. And basically a god could answer prayers or grant wishes to humanity, but they have to be very, very specific in what they grant as far as wishes. Because if whatever they say is either has to be true or it becomes true. And if you say something where you don't have the power to make that true, then you'll die. So a very simple explanation of that is one god could say, the god of this sea is dead. And then the god of that sea is like, I am alive. And so whichever god is more powerful will win and their statement becomes true, and then the god that is less powerful dies because they don't have the power to make that statement true versus the other god's power. And it could be not necessarily even like a god versus god power thing. A god could say something like, my people will never die, and then every single time something would happen to their people, it's like, A, what is their people? So that's a question. And then, like, how do they have the power to protect that person from dying every single time that person is about to die? And even like keeping like old age alive and things like that. So it's a very interesting system, and you've got gods who are very risky and they will grant things without really thinking about it. And then you have gods who are very like contemplative, where they'll be like, what are the possible consequences to me granting this wish? And in that, they will grant very few wishes. And all of that was just so incredibly interesting. But still, I hated this book for one very, very specific reason. It's written in second person, and I cannot get into books written in second person because it's you. Like, you're reading and it says, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. You, in this case, are a trans man, and the god who is the narrator of the story talking to you is basically talking about like all of your actions leading up to the, finale of the story, intermixed with this god's like history. So some parts of it are in like first person, where it's like, I did this, when the god's talking about their history, but a lot of it is like, I saw you do this, your actions were this, blah, 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 blah. And the reason I can't get into second person is because you're telling me I did these things, you were doing these things, and they are always things that I would never fucking do in my entire life. I am not a man. I do not make decisions on being a man. I would have not made any of the decisions that this character did, so telling me that I did these while I'm reading is pulling me out of the story every single time I get a you in there, because it was not me. I'm not doing this shit. And it makes it really, really hard for me to enjoy a story in second person just because of that. I need to be able to like get into the story and read about characters. And I liked the character well enough, but it was not me. Stop saying you. So, if you're not pissed off by second person, you might like that book a lot more than I did. The other kind of warning for it is it has a very open-ended ending, so there's no real like resolution or anything like that, so that might bother people. That doesn't bother me at all, but I do know it bothers a lot of people. So if you are fine with open-ended stories and don't mind second person, you might like this a whole lot better than I did, because the just pantheon of gods was an awesome thing to read. The third newer book to me that I read was The Memory Police by Yoko Agawa. I believe is how you say her last name. I could be pronouncing that extremely incorrectly. Now, this was originally written in 1994 and translated in 2019 to English from Japanese. So this isn't really a new book, it's just a new book to English speakers. This had the most interesting concept that I don't know was done perfectly because I can see a bunch of flaws, but I think those flaws are due to translation. That's at least what I want to pretend. So what this is this is an island off Japan, or off like mainland Japan, and we don't know why, but people lose memories. Somebody on this island will wake up in a morning and they know that something doesn't exist for them anymore. Something is gone from their memories. And let's, for an example, to understand this extremely weird concept of losing your memories, we'll say a pin. So this is a Sharpie, but whatever. It's a pin now. And they will wake up, they'll know something's missing, they'll have to like look around for a little while, and then they'll see an object and be like, that's what's missing from my memory. And they'll, for a day or two, remember that this is a pin, and they'll be able to like gather them up and get rid of them. But even on day one, when you first wake up, they'll not be able to like tell you what this is for. Like, okay, I know this is a pin. I don't know what a pin does. I don't know anything about it. And then they'll, if it's something like a pin, they'll get rid of it and burn all of them. They're not, like, pins don't not exist anymore. It's just the memory of pins don't exist. So they'll get rid of them, burn them if they can. If not, then just kind of forget it. It decays. And kind of move on with their lives. Now, if like 2 years down the road you are cleaning your house and you find a pin in the back of a drawer, it'll still exist as an object, but you might not even be able to know or to remember that it's called a pin. If you have some like an extreme attachment, let's say that you were like your job was calligraphy and so you used a pen every single day, then maybe you'll remember, hey, that's a pen, but you won't remember what to do with a pen even if that was your entire life. Now this could happen to anything, whether it's a pen, whether it's birds. Birds disappear very early in the book, and then it gets darker than that, but I'm not going to spoil because I think this is a very interesting story. So all of that and just the concept of losing the memory of something when it still exists, mixed with the fact that there are the memory police in here. And while people in general forget these things, there is a genetic disorder that causes some people to not lose their memories. And the memory police kind of like enforces the loss of these memories, and in a very Orwellian way, they will kidnap people who they realize are not losing their memories, and then those people just disappear, and you don't know what's happening to it, because you're following like a regular girl who completely loses her memories. So you're not getting a lot of answers in this question, or in this novel. That being said, the downsides of this, which didn't really bother me, but the first downside did bother me, but I'm gonna say it's a translation thing. And then the second downside did not bother me, but I can see it bothers a lot of people looking at reviews of this book. So the first thing is like the consistency with the memories disappearing. As I said just a second ago, birds were one of the first things that disappeared. And this is a big deal to the main character because her father is an what is that called? An ornithologist? I think that's the wrong word, but he studies birds for a living. Like, that's his entire career, his entire being. So it's a really, really big deal for her when birds vanish, because that was her father's entire life. Now, then this happens really early in the story, so it's not a spoiler, but then like 50% into the book, they're talking about chickens, and they're trying to find a chicken to eat, or talking about the chicken laying eggs, and just general conversations about chickens. A chicken is a bird. You should have no memory of chickens and not know what the fuck a chicken is, or that it lays eggs, or anything like that, if birds are gone from your memory. And I think that might just be a translation, because maybe it's not necessarily birds that are gone, but like a specific like type of like a wild bird that just didn't translate well from Japanese to English. Other examples of this is like pictures vanish, and they're checking IDs and looking at the pictures on IDs. So why didn't the picture on your ID vanish from your memory? Or why even carry IDs if you're not supposed to have pictures, because pictures have vanished? Another one is fruit. That one didn't bother. That one is a lot less, because it says most fruit vanish, or a lot of fruits vanished. It didn't say all fruits vanished. It just said like a lot of fruits vanished. So anytime they talk about fruit after that, I just assume that it's a fruit that is not associated with that. The other thing that bothered a lot of people but does not bother me is you get no answers in this book. Zero answers, absolutely not a single answer at all, because you're from the perspective of just a normal woman. She has no answers. She doesn't know what's going on. There's no way for her to know what's going on. So the ending is very open-ended. You were left with so many, like, why is this happening? Is this the government? Is this a natural occurring phenomenon? Like, why are some people not losing their memories? Like, you get no answers in this book. And so if like that kind of thing bothers you, you're gonna hate this book. But that one is the one that I thought was really good, but not like the greatest book I've ever read. Now, the two books that I've already talked about in previous videos, I am going to review them here, but if you know all of, or if you've seen those other videos, you've already heard me talk about these books. And those are, or the first one's going to be 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. I hated this book. I read this in December last year for, it was part of the Goodreads Choice Awards. I think it got 11th place in the finals for best, what was it? Best fantasy. And I read it because I owned it. I got it from Book of the Month Club. This is a young adult book. It came in when Book of the Month Club had a young adult book of the month. This one, I read this right about the same time that I read Starless Sea. And they have very, very similar concepts, and I thought the Starless Sea did the concept about 8 bajillion times better than that. This isn't like a horrible book. I just thought it was very mediocre. And the more it gets nominated for awards this year, like the more I don't like it, because I don't see what anybody thought this is like a great award nominee worthy book. Like, why is this getting nominated when The Starless Sea is not? When The Starless Sea was like so much better of the exact same concept. This is basically a multi-dimensional travel type of thing. Like I said, it's been a very long time since I've read this. Basically this young girl and her father, father travels around the world looking for these doors to alternate dimensions and like kind of exploring them and then bringing back like trinkets or interesting stuff that rich people collect from these alternate dimensions. And while he is doing that, she lives with one of these old rich dudes who collect the things from alternate dimensions. And that's basically all I could tell you without spoiling anything. Like I said, it's not like the absolute worst book in the world. I just thought it was painfully mediocre. And the very last book that was on here is probably in the running for my favorite book that I've read this year. So this one is obviously the one that I think should win this award, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Now, this is the easiest book in the world to explain because it says right here on the cover, lesbian necromancers in space, or specifically lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space. So this book is entirely character driven, and if you do not like Gideon's personality, you're not gonna like this book. I loved Gideon's personality. I thought that her sarcasm and her like fuck the world mentality and desire to do nothing but hit people with a broadsword and look at titty magazines is just everything that I ever needed in a book. This is kind of a, what is that genre? A closed circle mystery, I guess? Closed circle murder mystery, where these people are in a haunted Gothic cathedral and they're trying to solve a mystery why people around them are getting murdered. And so the mystery aspect didn't really do anything for me. I'm not a huge mystery fan, but I think if you like mystery, then you'll like this. This also, like, as well as being a mystery, obviously it's fantasy because you've got like the necromancers, but then it's also sci-fi because it takes place in space. This is like a conglomerate of necromancy planets, and each planet has a different like specialty as far as like their types of necromancy. For the ninth planet, where Gideon is from, even though Gideon is not a necromancer, she is the bodyguard of a necromancer. As you can probably tell from the cover, it's bone necromancy, where Harrow, or Harrowhawk, who is Gideon's necromancer, can take a tiny shard of bone and then make an army of skeletons out of it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, you'll probably like this. If it doesn't sound interesting to you, I know a lot of people were very much like, I didn't understand this book, I was confused, I have no idea what's going on, like the story was boring, I hated Gideon's personality. If you hate Gideon's personality, you were never gonna make it through this book. But if you like her sarcastic, bitchy personality, it'll be your favorite, like it's my favorite. Now, on a side note, the second book in this series, Harrowhawk the Ninth, came out earlier this year, and I did read that as well. And I didn't like it nearly as much as this because Gideon is absent for most of the book. So this one is definitely a character-driven story. And the next one is a character-driven story as well, but I did not like Harrowhawk's character as much as I like Gideon's character. So I'm a little iffy on the series itself, but the first book in the series I am in love with. So that's what I thought about the novels nominated for the World Fantasy Awards of 2020. Obviously, Gideon the Ninth is the book that I think should win based off of what I've read. Outside of that, I would put The Memory Police next, just because I really, really enjoyed it. After that, I would put The Raven Tower, because I liked everything except the perspective of it. Just the gods in that were so cool. Then 10,000 Doors of January, which I just felt was so just mediocre, but I can't at this point tell you anything awful about the book. It's just not memorable. It's not worth an award. And then Queen of the Conquered would be my bottom, just because the story itself, I couldn't. But let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments below. If you did read them, what did you think? Or do you agree or disagree with any of my decisions? Am I crazy for not liking a book that you love? Or did you hate one of the books that I really liked? That's it. I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.